Thank you very much, and good morning. Yes, still morning. My name is Rich Weil. I'm the Senior Vice President for Global Operations for Metaverse Mod Squad. I want to talk to you a little bit today about my experience and our experience as a company in expanding into different markets, different ways we've done it, and different ways I've seen done throughout my career. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, I think I'm on career number 4.5 now, or something like that, where I started out, I grew up in Texas. I started out, I went to the University of Texas in Austin. I got a degree in military history. So my options were to join the Army or to work in a bookstore. And I worked in a bookstore. So I worked in a bookstore for a while. I did technical support for Barnes & Noble, which is a book chain in the US and over here as well, I believe. And then I got into, I did flood zone mapping, which, so whatever. I did that for a little while. And then I got into human resources. Human resources was probably my first, what I would call major career. And so I did human resources in Austin during the tech boom. Got to work with a lot of great companies, both as an agency recruiter and as an in-house HR person. One of the companies that I worked for was a company called Athens Group. I worked for Intel. I worked for Trilogy, which was a very interesting company. But and I worked for this company called Athens Group. Athens Group was a consultancy, a very high-level consultancy, the kind of guys that Michael Dell go to for advice. So when Michael Dell wanted to figure out this whole e-commerce thing in the 90s, they went to talk to the Athens Group guys. Needless to say, I was the dumbest person at that company. They were all geniuses, and they were just really fantastic to work with. I really enjoyed it. And I'm going to talk more about them in a little bit. But so I actually got into the gaming industry around 2003, 2004. I became community relations manager for a company called NCSoft. It's a Korean-owned company that had a large presence in Austin. Their American operation was based out of Austin. And that also factors into the talk a little bit later on. Very interesting company. I ran several different community organizations. How I was hired was very interesting. I was a big gamer, played a lot of games, had no experience in the game industry. There was a big internal conflict about who they were going to hire for that job. Half the company hated one internal person, half the company hated the other internal person, and nobody really knew who I was. So at the end of the day, it was, let's hire the HR guy. He probably can't do too much damage. They were wrong. But still, it was a really good experience. I enjoyed working for them. I also worked for a couple startups in Atlanta after I left NCSoft, and then I wound up at Cartoon Network. I worked at Cartoon Network for a few years. And then about 5.5, 6 years ago, I had the good fortune of being able to come on board Metaverse Mod Squad. And of course, Metaverse Mod Squad, we do a lot of digital engagement. Tell you more about that later. I got to get to the point of the discussion pretty soon. I am the king of digression, if you haven't noticed already. So at Metaverse Mod Squad, we were opening a new office in Sacramento. That was our first brick and mortar office. So that was our first experience with doing something, from a physical perspective, since we're primarily a remote company. We have people who work all over the world. That also factors into our experience. But so as far as expanding into different cultural markets. There really are, it's not just one size fits all, and there's really a lot of different ways you can do that. And also a different cultural market can be anything. When I was at Athens Group, we were working in Austin, which is keep Austin weird and all that kind of stuff, as technology hub, very informal. We opened an office in Houston, just down the road, 2 hours down the road. But Houston's a big oil town. They do things a lot differently than in Austin. And so that was my first experience. When you go to a meeting in Austin, you're wearing, this would be overdressed for Austin, big time. You go to a meeting in Houston, and who's the crazy person wearing the Nehru jacket? He should be in a tie and a suit, and that's how it was certainly back then in the 90s. So even then we had a cultural adaptation to make to a city in our own state that you could drive to in 2 hours. So, imagine if things were wildly different between, here and Belfast. And they are a little different. I've even actually noticed a little bit myself that there are differences even when in the cities here in Ireland. But So there are different ways that you can expand into different markets. Of course, one way is, and we've pretty much done them all at this point at Metaverse. So our first expansion into the EU market was through hiring people over here in the EU to work for us remotely. So we had people in Germany and France and Italy and Ireland and England and Spain and everywhere. My favorite was one of our Russian speakers who lived in Moldova. Moldova, of course, has a kind of challenging economy, and he loved the job. He got good pay, work at home, play games, and that's why I always joked and called him the King of Moldova. So you have to identify really how you want to do it and what your goal is. When we decided to expand into the EU market in a physical way, with an office and all that stuff, we did it for a very specific reason, and that reason was that we wanted to become more of an EU company. We have lots of clients. Our main client base is, of course, in the U.S., but we were getting more and more clients in the EU, and just as we wanted to have our brick and mortar presence in the U.S. to show our commitment, we wanted our brick and mortar presence in the EU to show our commitment here as well. But there are different criteria that you need to think about when you are identifying these expansion opportunities. One is obviously business opportunities. There's a lot of good reasons to go do something like open an office in India or in the Philippines, cost being the main reason, and availability of some quality staff would be another reason. But is that really the business opportunity you're after? If that's what you want to do, that's great. But if you are opening an office in India because you're going to get cheap labor, and your idea is to use that cheap labor, expand into the EU, you're trying to go way too many different directions. You have to focus, and you have to be native in the environment that you want to expand into. Because at the end of the day, we were talking about expansion. We're talking about business expansion. So that targeting, I think, is very crucial. Another criteria that needs to be identified is cultural affinity. And I think really this is one of the most important things that I can talk about in this topic. Cultural affinity is crucial. When I was at NCSoft, we were owned by a Korean company. We were in the US, a big operation in the US. We also not only had our US office, but we had studios all over the US. And then we were tasked with opening up the EU office in Brighton. And all of this run from Korea. So I have to admit, there were quite a few communication difficulties. And those communication difficulties were primarily because I think that there was a lot of need for independence. People wanted to be independent. People were told they were going to be independent. There was not a lot of checking back. Is this okay if I do this? Is this okay if I do that? So there wasn't a good chain of command. And there wasn't, I think there wasn't a lot of good communication along those lines. Now, NCSoft's a great company. I love them. I'm not trying to say anything negative about them. We worked with, this was way back in the day, so all this stuff is way in the past. And since then, I think that there's been a lot of, the way they're set up now is fantastic. But it just goes to show the growing pains. I don't think anybody can deny there were a lot of growing pains with that expansion. Cartoon Network was an example kind of on the other side, where we were at Cartoon Network and we had a studio in Korea that was making a game for us. So in that case, we were running that studio. So when I was in Atlanta, I was asked to talk to a group of Korean businessmen who had come into town to identify investment opportunities, especially around the game space. And it kind of hit me, after dealing on both sides of the coin, it kind of hit me that one of the most important things about expanding into another cultural environment is you have to remember the golden rule. The golden rule is he who has the gold makes the rules. So if you are the one being opened as an office, it's up to, from a host company somewhere else, it's up to you to make sure you're understanding how the parent company is communicating with you. And if you are the one who are opening the office somewhere else, it's crucial for you to also make sure that the new office understands how you're going to communicate. And you need to be seriously redundant in communications. You really need to hook in along those communication lines, whether it's email, Skype, GoToMeeting, whatever. But you really need to over-communicate in the early days to set expectations. Just to give you one example, there are Asian cultures where saying no is not easy, and it's not done with that kind of directness. And so I've seen projects go on for 6 months longer than they were supposed to. And waste millions of dollars because somebody didn't understand that their boss was saying, no, I don't want you to do this anymore. Oh, okay, should we keep going? Well, I'm not sure that will be optimal. Oh, okay, well, if you're not sure, we'll keep going. So that's a summation and a very simplified way of looking at it, but it's very true. Communication is key. And so you have to recognize the different cultural communication differences. Regular communication schedule is very important. Metrics and schedule is also very important. It's really easy if you are having an office that is being run fairly independently, it's easy to have things like feature creep, things get out of scope, whether it's physical plant, hiring people, software expenditures, hardware expenditures. Those are things you need to be very careful of as well. But really, so there's different ways you can expand. You can just hire staff in another country. You can open an office and put staff in it and have it run pretty much out of there. But honestly, if I'm here to give advice, my advice is the pattern I have seen work again and again is you want to have a strong core senior staff in your new office of the people who live there. I guess native would be the right word to use. You want to have that strong core staff, and then initially you want to also have a strong leadership component from the company. That has worked for the company for a long time, knows where all the pitfalls are, knows all the little quirks of the culture, and those people will be there to help guide that core senior native staff for a period of time, 1 year, 2 years, whatever, and then the objective should be for that office to run on its own with its senior staff. You would have the opportunity to identify people who you feel will fill that leadership role later on. Maybe somebody who will be in charge of that office, somebody who will be promoted in the organization as a whole. How that office is integrated into the organization as a whole is also very important, and there are a lot of different choices to be made there as well. So I think that's very key. I have seen many different companies do that with success. In Galway, BioWare, big game company, did it that way and has been very successful. ZeniMax, another big company, did it that way, very successful. Electronic Arts, some people, little game company, no, not a little game company, huge game company. They did it that way as well when they set up all their organizations over here in Ireland. So I would say that is really one of the best ways to do that, to expand into that market. Crucial to plan ahead. It's not something that you can do on a moment's notice, even if it seems like you can do it on a moment's notice. If you have a very cooperative, business interests or development organizations to talk to in the host country, hey, no, come on, we can start tomorrow. It's like, oh, okay, we'll start tomorrow. Don't do it that way. It's important to plan ahead, not to be rushed. In the game industry, they say you only get one launch. That means you can't put your game out and then go, oh, that sucked. Let me walk that back a little bit and we'll just launch it again. And they actually do try and do that sometimes, and it never works. And that's one of the truest maxims of the game industry, not only the game industry nowadays with all the apps and stuff. You really only get one launch. And that includes an expansion into a different market as well. Remember the golden rule? We talked about that. You definitely have to understand the cultural communication differences. I think that is hugely key. And then one of the, obviously ignored or overly independent offices can cause a lot of trouble down the road. And that doesn't mean that the home company has to rule with an iron fist. You do have to trust your native staff and the reason you're there is for them, and is for them to expand into the market that they know so well. So my experience here so far has been fantastic in that. We have a mixed group here already, and it has been really helpful and have been able to rely on the advice and guidance of those people we have here already. So it's just been great, and so I think that definitely works. And also, of course, metrics and expectations you need to set right up front. I kind of ran through my last bit quickly because I was running out of time. I spent 10 minutes without saying a word, which killed 10 minutes without saying a word, which my audiences are usually very appreciative of. So I would love to take questions if there are any questions.
Just so you know, I don't have to do an Annika Rice impression. There are roving mics at the side. So does anybody have any questions? Don't be shy. Otherwise, I can ask questions.
If there's something I didn't cover that you want to hear about, fire away.
Well, I have a question. Oh, good, we have a question. That's exactly what I was going to ask.
I knew I shouldn't have opened up the floodgates for non-related questions. I'm not telling you where I got the jacket, just so you know. I'm not telling you where I got this jacket. But so what we do is Metaverse Mod Squad, it's easy to sum up in really 2 words, which is digital engagement. Anytime a company is dealing with their customers through the internet, that's something we can help with. Whether it's customer support, whether it's moderation, we do a lot of moderation work for forums and through social media, Facebook pages, Twitter channels. We do a lot of quality assurance. We do community management, and we do a lot in the world of social media as well. My specialty, as I probably mentioned, is in the game industry, but I'm just one part of the company. We work for a lot of different companies as well.
And you have a presence here in Derry at the moment, is that correct?
Yes, we have people who work for us here in Derry, yes.
And what has your experience, because a lot of people are from Derry or from the Northwest or Belfast, what has been your experience thus far?
Who lives in Derry right now? I do. All right, awesome. So I wanted to know how fast I had to run when I insulted them. No, I'm just kidding. So I have, this is the 3rd time I've been over here, but also it's the longest time I've been here. I got here on June 1st, and I'm going to be here through July 25th. So I love it, to be honest. And the thing I notice more than anything else, and this is actually kind of, a lot of my family's background is Irish, so it's Irish and German primarily. But so the people who I talk to in Derry are so curious. So as soon, like the first time I walked into a pub and ordered a beer, it was the 3rd degree, as we say in the States. Oh, you're obviously not from around here. And so, of course, I always say, no, I grew up here. I've lived here my whole life. What are you talking about? I'm not from around here. And so, oh, no, come on. What are you doing here? Where do you work? How long are you going to be here? Where are you from? What's California like? Oh, you're from Texas. Did you grow up with a ranch? I did, but still.
JR?
Do you like Dallas? All that. So you get all the questions. But the funny thing is that in different cultural markets, that would be considered rude. But I love it. I ask questions all the time. I love to find out about people, and I love to ask them questions. And to me, a conversation that's a game of 20 questions, to me, is a blast. So I fit right in because I just ask them right back. Oh, what do? You work at the pub. How long have you worked here? What do you want to do? Are you going to school? And so, I ask them right back. I don't have any problem.
And I don't want to put you on the spot too much, but what do you think the Northwest does really well? Like in a very broad context, mm-hmm. What does it do well, and what do we need to improve on?
Well, I think education and human development, I guess, is something that I think the Northwest does very well and pays a lot of attention to. And you put your money where your mouth is, so to speak, when it comes to that. And I would say, as far as things to improve, very similar to what Ian was talking about, which was infrastructure. Connectivity, infrastructure, that kind of thing. So not that it's bad, I'm not saying it's bad, but I think there's always room for improvement. When we started our Sacramento office in downtown Sacramento, we had a lot of difficulty with that ourselves. you know, the cables we were using were old, and we had to get people in to replace cables, and not just in the office, but in the street. You know, so they were like, oh well, if you guys are going to make a fuss, we'll just replace all these cables over here, and they did. And so you know, squeaky wheel gets the grease, all that kind of good stuff. But I think those are I think that's one area that would drive further development.
And as I say, you're in Derry now, and I don't want to make it too specific, but going down the line, moving forward, would you like to see more growth in the Derry office perhaps? Could that potentially be something?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. We're, you know, you guys are going to hear a lot more from us going forward. That's just all I have to say.
Some people
about
might want to put in their CVs to him.
MetaverseModSquad.com. You know, they have the resume, and you know, like I said, I've been with the company for almost 6 years now, longer than I've stayed at any other company in my entire career, even the map making one. So you know, we definitely want to integrate into the community, just like we have in Sacramento, just like we have in other places, and we're looking forward to it.
And what kind of growth are you seeing in your business? Because I personally am really interested in digital engagement, and I think any business who wants to be relevant to your customer today, you have to get behind digital engagement. There's just no way around it.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's cyclical to some degree, because you see kind of the rise and fall of different areas of different industries. For example, I gotta talk games. That's the only thing I know about. So in games, you have, you know, like you had a heyday of games that were called MMOs, massive multiplayer online games. And so that drove a lot of digital engagement. I would say that modern community relations kind of was born out of the early MMO game industry. And so there are people who would disagree with me, but they'd be wrong. But So that part of that industry has kind of gone down. We've seen other parts of the industry go up. We used to see a lot of kids' virtual worlds. That's kind of where we got our start, was moderating in kids' virtual worlds. That has kind of come down, but you see other areas rising, not only in the game industry, but others as well. I think that a lot of companies start out with a really good business model. You know, the startup talk was really awesome. You know, how are we going to make money? How are we going to do all that stuff? And I think that, like, way low on that list is, okay, now that we got them, how are we going to keep them? How are we going to communicate with them? How are we going to get their feedback? How are we going to help them with their problems? You know, obviously that's not problem number one for a startup, but it's problem number one once you roll your product out.
Yeah, no, and that's something that I would agree. You see too many good businesses not focus on customer retention.
Yeah.
Keeping a hold of people. So Rich, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.